This month, join me as I study the birth of civilization. Thousands of years ago, human populations sprang up in mass numbers in a region now consumed by a desert. As the human populations boomed, cities were formed. Cities mean civilization. But what characteristics define any culture as being part of a civilization? Why is the cradle of civilization located in one of the most inhospitable places on Earth by modern-day standards? And what lessons does this ancient roadmap teach us? To find out, we're putting our noses to the ground, studying the geographical trail, and hounding history. Around 10,500 BC, a group of Natufian hunter-gatherers worked in the heat of the day to harvest wild cereals growing in Syria and Lebanon. 1,500 years later, humans in modern-day Iraq began the process of incipient agriculture, the cultivation of wild cereals, and the management of sheep flocks. Hi, I'm Rob Reep. This short time span is part of the most historic portion of human history. These ancient Near East people were laying down the foundation for civilization. While the site of human civilization was still in the distance by several thousand years, many advances were on the threshold of breaking through and changing life for all humanity. But what characteristics define any culture as being part of a civilization? In truth, there are 5 primary characteristics that we as historians use to determine whether or not any group can be considered a civilization. Those include settlement in cities, full-time specialization of labor, a concentration of surplus production, a class structure, and last but not least, a state organization, or a government. Without these 5 must-have characteristics, no population can be called a true civilization. But there are also 5 secondary characteristics that can be used to determine just how complex a civilization truly is. First, has that civilization completed monumental public works? Do they conduct long-distance trade? Is there standardized artwork? Do they use arithmetic, geometry, and astronomy? And of course, the 5th secondary characteristic, can they write? With these characteristics defined, why is the cradle of civilization located in one of the most inhospitable places on Earth by modern-day standards? As always, geography spells it out loud and clear. Today's world map, while slightly different than the map of 5,500 years ago, overall hasn't changed that drastically in the big scheme of things. Yes, tectonic plates have shifted several feet over time, and rivers have undoubtedly moved here and there, but the overall map is the same as 3,500 BC. It was then that city-states began to develop in Sumeria, modern-day Iraq. Cities are, of course, one of the primary characteristics of civilization. The city-states of Sumeria began to form because of the extensive farming practices being developed around the existing Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Those 2 rivers, which begin their course in Turkey, run through Syria, and finally Iraq, were essentially the backbone of all civilization throughout the region. Without them, civilization would have most likely not been possible in that region. The Tigris and Euphrates run through harsh terrain. Mountains and deserts flank their every move all the way to the Persian Gulf. Annual floods cause the land around the rivers and in the floodplain to burst to life. Wheat, barley, peas, and lentils grew wild. As ancient people arrived to the area of Mesopotamia, they began to live off of these wild grains. With these wild grains now supporting them, there was no longer a need to move from location to location in order to survive. Around 5,500 BC, with the development of irrigation, humans that had previously been hunter-gatherers became farmers. Farming is, of course, a specialized labor, which is another criteria for civilization. Farming caused people to settle. As the population grew, cities were formed, and with those cities came governments. Many of these city-states were run by individual rulers or kings, which created a class system of rulers and workers. Government brought the need for recording facts of surplus crops, so writing and pictograph chronology was formed. Writing was formed in Sumeria around 3500 BC. Civilization had finally arrived. In short, the Tigris and Euphrates rivers caused wild grains to grow in their fertile floodplains. Hunter-gatherers began to harvest these crops and settle down around the rivers. As the population grew, people lived closer together, forming cities. Those cities needed government to provide law and order. The governments needed writing to record the law and history of the cities. So in the end, civilization formed in Mesopotamia because it contained the resources to sustain year-round life. This same situation has occurred time after time throughout the world. Civilization sprang up in Egypt because of the Nile River. It arrived in North America because of the Mississippi. But it first occurred in Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization. Without resources, life is not possible. As humans, we stay in one place only because it provides for our every need. This is the only reason why ancient Mesopotamia is the cradle of civilization. Later, art would enter into the mix. Oftentimes, that art was not meant to be a decorative piece. Many times, art was more of a status symbol, or sometimes even a political statement, much like modern-day yard signs. As time carried on, the governments of Mesopotamia built monumental public works, such as roads, and even the famous ziggurats, which were large structures built in the region. Humans continued to build and grow their populations for thousands of years. Other unique civilizations sprang up throughout the world when technological advances allowed them to survive in different environments. But it all started here, in Mesopotamia, the birthplace of human civilization, all because of two rivers.